Okay, so you know how we like to do these deep dives, right? We take something you're really interested in and try to really get to the heart of it, like extract the good stuff, the insights that can really make a difference. And this time, we're going deep on a book a lot of people are talking about, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, all about personal finance and building wealth and all that.
Yeah, this one, I think what really stood out to you was how Kiyosaki takes these big financial ideas and kind of frames them through the advice he got from these two very different father figures, right? Like almost a
That's
built-in debate in the book itself. Gives you these contrasting viewpoints on money, something we all deal with, of course, and forces you to think about your own approach.
Exactly. So that's what we're here for today. Our mission is to dig into those actionable things about money and assets and what he calls financial intelligence. The stuff you can actually use in your own life, right? No need to get overwhelmed. We just want those clear aha moments. So, how about we start with these two dads, the rich dad and the poor dad?
Yeah, let's jump right in. So the poor dad was actually a very educated guy, believed in job security, play it safe, good job, steady paycheck. That's the key to a good life. Thought their house was their biggest asset and that companies or the government would always be there to take care of them. Interesting thing Kiyosaki mentions is that his poor dad tended to pay his bills last.
Now, the rich dad, he was a different story. Didn't have as much formal education, but he was super sharp when it came to money. His big thing was managing risk. And he saw the house as a liability, something that takes money out of your pocket every month. And he really pushed this idea of financial independence. The rich don't work for money. That was one of his core beliefs. And importantly, he always paid his bills first.
And it's really important to understand that Kiyosaki isn't saying one dad was right and the other was wrong. It's more about the contrast. By putting these two philosophies side by side, it gets you thinking critically about your own assumptions about money. It did for him right. It's about developing your own way of thinking about finances, not just accepting what you've been told.
And that leads us to probably the most famous lesson from the book. The poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. So let's break that down a bit. Kiyosaki talks about working for his rich dad when he was younger for like 10 cents an hour. Can you believe that?
hmm
And later on, he even worked for free. Why would anyone do that?
Well, it wasn't about the money that was the point. The rich dad did that on purpose to teach him a lesson.
Yeah.
He wanted the young Kiyosaki to feel what it's like to work really hard for almost nothing, to show him the limits of just trading time for a paycheck. By taking away the money, he forced him to think outside the box, find other ways to create value and generate income.
And that's where the idea of the rat race comes in, right? That cycle of fear and desire. People work to make money, but then as they make more, they tend to spend more. And they're right back where they started, stuck in this loop of needing to work more and more just to maintain their lifestyle.
Exactly. And what's interesting is the rich dad pointed out that even people with a lot of money can get caught in a kind of fear, the fear of losing what they have. So they keep chasing more and more, not because they need it, but because they're scared of going back to where they were. The key takeaway here is to become aware of those emotions and how they can influence your financial decisions. Try to break free from that cycle of fear and greed.
So the point isn't just to earn more, but to understand how money works and how to make sure it doesn't end up controlling your life. Kiyosaki makes this distinction between being smart in school or at your job and being financially intelligent, which is about knowing how to manage and grow your money. He talks about people who win the lottery or athletes who make millions and then end up broke. It's a reminder that without that financial know-how, the money can disappear pretty quickly. For you listening, it means you have to go beyond just thinking about your income and start understanding the bigger picture of how to build wealth.
And that takes us right into the next big lesson. Why teach financial literacy? Kiyosaki argues that while schools do a pretty good job of teaching us academic stuff and job skills, how to get a job and do it well, they don't really teach us about money, how to manage it, how to grow it, how to protect it, and that's a huge gap.
And one of the most important parts of being financially literate, according to the book, is knowing the difference between an asset and a liability. Now, it's important to understand that he defines these terms a little differently than traditional accounting. For Kiyosaki, an asset is something that puts money in your pocket regularly, and a liability is something that takes money out.
Yeah, that's a really crucial difference to grasp. So let's take your house, for example.
Yeah.
Most people think of their house as an asset, right? But Kiyosaki says for most folks, it's actually a liability. Think about it. You've got mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance repairs, all that stuff. It's constantly taking money out of your pocket.
And he contrasts that with what he considers true assets, things like stocks that pay dividends or rental properties or owning a business that generates cash flow. These are things that consistently put money back in your pocket. He points out that poor people mainly have expenses. The middle class tend to buy liabilities that they think are assets, like a fancy car or a bigger house with a bigger mortgage.
And all of this leads to the concept of cash flow, which is basically the story of your relationship with money, how it moves in and out of your life. It's not just about how much you make, it's what you do with it, how you protect it, how you keep it, and most importantly, how you make it work for you.
He even brings in this Japanese concept of the three powers: the sword, the jewel, and the mirror. The sword representing your skills, the jewel representing money, and the mirror representing self-knowledge. He said self-knowledge is the most important of three, because if you understand your own weaknesses and tendencies, you're less likely to be controlled by the power of money.
It's about not being afraid to be different, to think for yourself financially. Kiyosaki suggests that a lot of people just accept conventional wisdom about money, even if it's not really true. Like, you have to have a mortgage to build credit, or leasing a car is always a bad idea. He uses this analogy of the Empire State Building with its strong foundation built on income-generating assets versus a typical house, which he sees as a weaker financial foundation because it's mainly an expense.
And here's a big point. He makes money just magnifies your existing patterns with money. If you're used to spending everything you earn, then having more money will probably just lead to more spending and maybe even more debt. It won't magically fix your financial situation.
Yeah, it's about getting those good financial habits in place first, understanding how money works in your life before you worry about making more of it.
Okay, let's move on to lesson 3, mind your own business. Now, don't worry, we're not saying you should be gossiping or ignoring your coworkers. What does Kiyosaki really mean by this in a financial sense?
When he says mind your own business financially, he's talking about building up that asset column, those things that consistently put money in your pocket. He noticed that a lot of people spend their lives mainly focused on their income statement, their salary from their job. They're essentially working to build someone else's asset column, the business owners, for instance.
And he uses this great example of Ray Kiyosaki, the guy who built McDonald's. When people asked him what business he was in, most would say hamburgers, right? But Kiyosaki said he was in the real estate business. He understood that the land under each McDonald's was incredibly valuable, and that's what made him really wealthy.
That's a perfect example of thinking beyond the obvious. Most people work for someone else, the company owner, the government, through taxes, the bank, through their mortgage. They're not really thinking about building their own base of income-generating assets. And Kiyosaki argues that this is a big reason why a lot of poor and middle-class folks are so hesitant to take risks with their money. They don't have that solid financial foundation to fall back on.
He also talks about net worth and how it can be a bit deceiving because it often includes things like your primary residence that you'd have to pay a lot of taxes on if you sold it. So his advice here is pretty straightforward. Keep your day job if you need to, but start actively acquiring real assets, not just things that cost you money.
And he makes this interesting distinction about luxuries. Really rich people tend to buy luxuries last after they've built up their assets, and the income from those assets can pay for those things. But poor and middle-class people often buy luxuries first, often going into debt to do it. They might be trying to look wealthy, but they're actually just digging themselves deeper into a hole.
So the takeaway here is to be proactive about building your asset column, even while you're working a regular job. Make your money start working for you so it can generate more income.
Lesson 4 is the history of taxes and the power of corporations. This is where Kiyosaki's rich dad really had a different understanding of how the financial world worked. He knew the rules, and he used them to his advantage.
Yeah, he talks about the Robin Hood idea, taking from the rich to give to the poor, and how, while that might sound good, it actually ended up putting a big chunk of the tax burden on the middle class.
Yeah.
His argument is that the super wealthy often don't get taxed the same way as regular employees do.
He goes into the history of income tax, explaining that when it started, it was meant to target the rich, but as the government needed more money, it expanded to include everyone. But the savvy people, the rich dad types, they figured out how to use the system to their advantage, especially through corporations.
He describes corporations not as these big buildings, but as legal entities, kind of like file folders, that have certain financial advantages. One big one is that corporations can deduct expenses before paying taxes, something most individuals can't do, and that can save them a ton of money.
Corporations also offer a layer of legal protection. Rich people can hold assets through these corporations without actually owning them directly, which can shield them from lawsuits and creditors. Kiyosaki argues that real financial IQ includes understanding accounting, investing, market trends, and the law. All these things work together to help you use these corporate structures effectively.
So the point here isn't to go out and incorporate yourself right away, especially if you don't have a lot of assets yet. It's about understanding that the financial game has different rules for different players, and learning how to navigate those rules strategically can give you a big advantage.
Lesson 5 is a really interesting one. The rich invent money. And he doesn't mean literally printing money or anything illegal. It's about having a different mindset, a different way of thinking about wealth creation.
Kiyosaki says it's often not just about being really smart, it's about being bold and creative and seeing things that other people miss. He talks about how Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone and Western Union didn't see the value in it, a huge missed opportunity for them.
He says that developing your financial IQ opens up more options for you. It helps you see possibilities instead of just getting scared when things change. Holding on to old ideas and ways of doing things can really hold you back, especially in a world that's constantly evolving.
And this is where he brings in his Cash HF flow game. It's this fun way to learn about how money works, the connection between your income and your expenses, and how to escape that rat race we talked about earlier. He even mentions there's an online version at richdad.com you can check out.
The key message here is that financial intelligence gives you more choices. It's the ability to take a bad situation, a financial lemon, and turn it into something good, maybe even into millions. He says money itself isn't actually real. It's just something we agree on as a society. So your mind, your ability to think about money in new ways becomes your most powerful tool for creating wealth.
He gives this example of how he made $40,000 in just 5 hours by understanding the real estate market and structuring a deal in a really smart way. He contrasts that with the slow and often heavily taxed returns you get from just putting your money in a savings account.
And he explains why he uses so many real-life examples in the book to inspire people to learn to show that building wealth is possible with the right knowledge, to show that anyone can do it, to show there are many different paths to reach your goals, and to emphasize that it's not rocket science. One of his key principles is profit is made when you buy, not when you sell.
And to wrap up this lesson, he talks about 3 main ways. The rich invent money, finding opportunities that others miss, finding creative ways to get funding beyond traditional bank loans, and building teams of talented people. It all comes back to the importance of financial literacy so you can spot those opportunities and take advantage of them.
Lesson 6 is all about work to learn, don't work for money. It's a big mindset shift, focusing on gaining valuable skills instead of just chasing a bigger paycheck.
Kiyosaki emphasizes the importance of always learning new things, especially in areas like sales and marketing, no matter what your main job is. He says schools tend to push us to specialize in one specific area, but his rich dad encouraged him to be more well-rounded, to learn a little about a lot of different things.
He talks about working in different parts of his rich dad's companies, accounting operations, sales, all that, to get a broader understanding of how businesses work. For him, the focus was always on learning and developing skills, not just on making money. And he compares this to the idea of looking for job security, saying that sometimes JOB stands for just over broke.
He warns about getting trapped in that endless cycle of working just to pay bills. In the long run, he says education, especially financial education and learning practical skills, is much more valuable than just having a steady but maybe limiting paycheck.
He even suggests getting a second job, not just for the money, but to learn something new. He uses the example of network marketing as a way to develop sales and communication skills. He says people with highly specialized skills might need unions or guaranteed job security because their skills might not be useful in other fields. He uses McDonald's as an example, not of great hamburgers, but of a great business system that can be replicated.
And he talks about the power of synergy, working with people who have different skills, building a team where everyone brings something unique to the table. Finally, he emphasizes that true wealth is about more than just money. It's about being a good teacher and giving back to the community. He mentions people like Rockefeller and Ford who were big philanthropists.
Chapter 7 is about overcoming obstacles. Kiyosaki says even for people who understand financial principles, there are 5 big things that can prevent them from actually building wealth.
The first one, and probably the most common, is fear, specifically the fear of losing money. He talks about the Battle of the Alamo not as a victory, but as an example of brave people facing overwhelming odds and ultimately failing. His point is that for a lot of people, the pain of losing money is much stronger than the potential joy of becoming wealthy.
He talks about the difference between winners who learn from their mistakes and use them to get better, and losers who let setbacks defeat them. He quotes John D. Rockefeller, who said he tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity. He says that while it's okay to be cautious and start early with investments if you really hate losing, overcoming, that fear of failure is often necessary to escape the rat race.
The second obstacle is cynicism. His rich dad used to say, cynics never win, winners analyze. He explains that being too critical and negative can blind you to opportunities, while being more analytical helps you see possibilities. He uses the example of people who say, I don't want to deal with fixing toilets when they hear about real estate investing, as an example of cynical thinking that keeps them from seeing the bigger picture. He suggests that sometimes your I don't wants hold the key to your success, because by identifying what you don't want to do, you're forced to find solutions like hiring a property manager to handle the things you don't like.
Number 3 is laziness, but it's often a sneaky kind of laziness where people stay busy doing unimportant things to avoid dealing with their finances. He contrasts the negative thought, I can't afford it, which stops you from thinking any further, with the more proactive question, how can I afford it? Which forces you to be creative and find ways to make things happen.
Bad habits are the fourth obstacle, and the big one he talks about is paying yourself last, putting all your other expenses before investing in your own future and building your asset column.
And lastly, number 5 is arrogance, thinking that what I don't know isn't important. Kiyosaki says this kind of intellectual arrogance can prevent you from learning, and it often comes from a place of insecurity. He really recommends being open to learning all the time and listening more than you talk so you can absorb new ideas.
So these are all pretty big mental and emotional barriers that even people who understand financial concepts have to be aware of and work on overcoming if they want to reach their goals.
Chapter 8 is all about getting started. Kiyosaki believes there are opportunities to build wealth everywhere. The problem is most people haven't learned how to see them.
He says it's important to figure out what you don't want in life so you can be clear about what you do want. What kind of financial future are you trying to avoid? That can be really motivating.
Mhm.
He also says that your time and your ability to learn are super valuable assets, and not having a lot of money right now is never an excuse to avoid investing in your financial education. He recommends putting your money into learning through books, seminars, and workshops.
He repeats his point that arrogant and critical people are often insecure deep down and afraid to take risks. He says again that listening is so important for absorbing new information, and he encourages a long-term mindset for building wealth instead of getting caught up in get-rich-quick schemes, which almost never work.
He gives some really important advice here. He says to find people who have already achieved the financial success you want and learn from them. And on the flip side, he says, don't take financial advice from chicken littles, the people who are always negative and scared about the economy. He also talks about insider trading, explaining the difference between the legal and illegal kinds, and emphasizes how important it is to have well-informed friends and to know where your financial information is coming from.
He recommends mastering one financial strategy at a time and then moving on to learn a new one, emphasizing how important it is to keep learning, especially in today's world. The idea of pay yourself first, which comes from the book The Richest Man in Babylon, is presented as a key to self-discipline, consistently putting money into your asset column before paying for other things. He also says to be careful with your expenses and let that financial pressure build instead of selling off your assets to pay off debts too early.
Finding a good and trustworthy financial advisor who actually has your best interests at heart and who invests their own money is another crucial piece of advice. He suggests putting together your own informal board of directors, a group of trusted advisors with different areas of expertise, and learning how to manage and reward people who are more skilled than you are in certain areas.
He talks about the idea of being an Indian giver, which in this context means finding ways to get assets without paying a lot of money up front, finding hidden value in deals. He encourages you to use your existing assets to get more assets and to make learning about finance fun and accessible, maybe through games like Cash of Flow.
Teaching other people what you learn is also emphasized as a way to solidify your understanding and maybe even create new opportunities. Networking, actively seeking out people who are already doing what you want to do and learning from them is highly recommended. He gives an example of learning about tax liens that way. He also suggests making a lot of offers, but always having a way out if you need it. Regularly looking for deals and focusing on things that are undervalued but have potential bargain and change elements is important. He even says you should try to find buyers before you buy something to make the transaction smoother. And he finishes by saying that money is ultimately an idea, and if you change your thinking, you can attract more of it. Start small if you need to, and focus on building passive income and portfolio income instead of relying only on a job.
Chapter 9, Still Want More. Here are some to-dos. Basically sums up a lot of the action steps from the book, like reading more books on finance and investing, playing the cash flow game, going to seminars and workshops, finding mentors and advisors, starting small, and practicing making deals, constantly working on building your asset column and learning about how corporations work.
And the final thoughts section, although it's not actually labeled that way in the book, kind of brings all the main ideas together. It says that the financial path you choose, whether you end up rich, poor, or somewhere in between, comes down to the choices you make every day, how you manage your money, and what you choose to invest in, both in terms of assets and in your own education. It encourages you to share what you've learned with others and highlights the importance of finding your own path in life for true fulfillment, suggesting that financial education can give you the freedom and options to pursue that path.
He talks about the four quadrants: employee, self-employed, business owner, and investor as a helpful way to understand your current financial situation and figure out where you want to be in the future. Overall, the main principles in Rich Dad Poor Dad give you a whole new way to look at money and the strategies for building lasting wealth.
So there you have it, a deep dive into the key lessons from Rich Dad Poor Dad. We explored the contrasting advice from those two father figures, talked about the difference between assets and liabilities, emphasized how important it is to keep learning about money, and highlighted the mindset shift needed to go from working for money to having your money work for you.
Our goal was to give you a really concentrated dose of insights to spark those aha moments without getting bogged down in too much detail. We hope this has given you some clarity and some practical knowledge that you can start to think about and maybe even use in your own financial journey.
And as a final thought, what's the very first step you can take right now to put one of these lessons into action? Maybe it's reading a book about investing, checking out the online cash flow game, or even just having a conversation with a friend about your financial goals. Keep learning, and if you find any other interesting sources that you think would be good for a deep dive, definitely send them our way.
Absolutely. Keep those ideas coming.
We'll be here to dive into them.